first, live, local. This is Fox 12 Now.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Fox 12 Now. I'm Greg Nibler. As always, thanks for joining us, whether you're watching on our website, our apps, or social media channels. It's always great to have you here. And of course, if you're on the social media channels, you can join the conversations that we get to have. And right now, we're going to be talking about red flag laws, in particular Oregon's, but red flag laws as a whole. That's a nickname for essentially a law that would allow a court order for a gun to be removed from someone who could be a danger to themselves or others. That's a very general, broad definition. There's a lot more nuance to that depending on what the law is, and we'll get into that in a minute. But Oregon's, just so you know, is called the Extreme Risk Protection Order. And there's a recent study that came out about that, about whether or not it is being utilized enough or properly and how it's being applied in certain situations. So we're going to be talking about that and everything under the sun associated with this. And that's because we have two experts joining us right now, and really appreciate both of you joining us here. So I just want to introduce, we have Jess Marks, the Executive Director of the Oregon Alliance for Gun Safety, and we have Ashley Beatty from the Deschutes County District Attorney's Office. Thank you both for being here and joining us today. Really appreciate it. And you know, it's such a huge issue and thing to talk about. And I think to just start off for everybody, I gave my basic definition of what a red flag law is. Perhaps maybe Jess or Ashley, whoever wants to take this one, could you give us maybe a more nuanced, better definition of that?
Yeah, thanks so much for having us today, Greg. We're glad to be here and talk about this important and life-saving law. The Extreme Risk Protection Order law passed in Oregon in 2017 in response to increased gun deaths in our state and increased gun violence nationally. And it's a civil law that allows law enforcement and family members to have a person who is showing imminent warning signs of immediate risk to themselves or to others have their firearms temporarily removed. And I think that's an important piece to note, that this is a tool that can be used, both in prevention of mass shootings or school shootings, and also importantly in prevention of gun suicide.
Which, obviously that's a very powerful tool if it is being utilized and is being actually properly enforced in certain situations. And I know we're going to get into that, but something else that, I know you wanted to talk about, and this is something that nationally, most recently, unfortunately, in Maine, what happened there. And I know President Biden was actually just there moments ago making a speech about that, about what happened in Maine, and whether or not a mass shooting like that, whether that could have been prevented based on something like a red flag law or what Maine has in place. And I think for that comparison is really important to let us know what kind of law was in place there and whether that's something that could have been used to prevent that from happening.
Yeah, thanks. I can go ahead and answer that one as well. As we think about Maine, first, our hearts are just with the people of Lewiston. It's such a devastating and heartbreaking situation that not only directly affected families, but will impact the broader community for years to come. And so our hearts are really with them. And one of the pieces that is perhaps most devastating is that it was perhaps preventable. That in this case, as in many cases, there were imminent warning signs. Family had reported what was happening, and Maine's yellow flag law, even as it exists, perhaps could have been used to prevent the situation and prevent the loss of lives and impact on the community if it had been properly understood, properly used. Of course, there's, a commission that was just started to review and actually look in detail at what happened. But some of the key differences that are important to understand are that in Maine, the process for the, so-called yellow flag law is much more cumbersome. It requires the person to actually go into police custody. It requires a complete evaluation from a medical provider, and it takes time. And yet what we know is that when people are in moments of crisis or an imminent warning is happening, that we need to be able to respond quickly while also, of course, respecting people's due process rights. And our extreme risk protection orders here in Oregon are based on those imminent threats to self or others. They are able, and as a result, law enforcement and families are able to respond much more quickly. And, I think we'll talk about this later, but we've actually just recently had a really public case where an extreme risk protection order did indeed help prevent a mass shooting. And so often these cases are much more private, or the data might not be public in terms of what's happening, but we're seeing that pretty consistently.
And I think that's, and I definitely, we're going to get into that too, how that was utilized here. So the one in Maine, and just to reiterate, completely heartbreaking. It's horrible and awful what happened there. It's also frustrating to know that had it maybe been easier, something could have been prevented like that in that situation. Going to the Oregon side, and how that works here and how it's being implemented. Let's talk about that, how this extreme risk protection order has been utilized here in Oregon. And Ashley, I know from what I understand that you've had experience with this.
Yes, thank you. I think here in Deschutes County, we have a multidisciplinary team of combination of advocates like myself, law enforcement, and community providers who, if they do have a concern or a family member has a concern, can come together and we can work on these in a collaborative fashion when we feel that there's an imminent risk of violence to our community.
And, go ahead. Sorry, I'm not sure if I interrupted there. We might have a little bit of delay on the Zoom, so this is live, so just so everybody knows. But yeah, and seeing that this is something that can be handled and that people can actually apply and help prevent something like this potentially happening again. Jess, I know that you had something else you were going to bring up about that as well.
Yeah, and I really would just give a shout out to Deschutes County, who have been the leaders in using and implementing ERPOs. And if we look at data, we're also seeing that it's a county that has been able to show reductions in suicide rates and in other areas that, although we don't have enough evaluation, although it's coming to show that direct correlation. And we know a lot of that happened just because of the leadership of individuals. Ashley perhaps can talk more about this, but there's a police officer in Bend who took it upon himself, although there isn't statewide training yet. As we look at the state secretary's report, it shows one of the challenges of ERPOs is they're not super well known. They're not commonly used across all of our counties, but in a place like Deschutes, where this officer took it upon himself to train and educate others, they have made a real difference in our community and created safer communities. And Ashley maybe can talk more to that.
Yes, I just want to give a shout out to that officer. So Jake Chandler worked at Bend Police Department when the ERPO law was initially passed. He is now an investigator with the district attorney's office. And he acts as a point of contact and really a mentor for fellow officers to touch base and run ideas by, are we there yet when it comes to that extreme risk? One of the things that I pride myself on working in Deschutes County is nobody takes an extreme risk protective order lightly. We want to make sure that we're utilizing these in the correct fashion when absolutely necessary to protect our community and that person that may be at risk.
And to that extent, as far as whether it's being utilized, enough, properly, however you may want to put that, statewide, and perhaps we can just focus on Deschutes County if that's better, but how often do you see this actually being utilized where someone is determined to be enough of a risk that they're having their weapon taken away?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. So last year, Deschutes County filed 66 of those extreme risk protective orders. Not all of them were granted. And then this year, thus far, we have filed over 56. And when I say we, that's a collective. So have been filed in Deschutes County, either by a loved one, family member, or law enforcement.
And as a result of that, do you feel like that has prevented perhaps violence that could have happened?
Yes.
Yeah.
And
please go ahead, Jess.
And there's both data and heartbreaking stories to back that. If we look at national data, for 1 out of 10 ERPOs filed, it's preventing a suicide. So it's correlated with a 10% reduction in suicide. In California, 20 out of 160 ERPOs that were filed prevented mass shootings where there was a direct or imminent threat. And we see that in the stories of individuals as well. Washington County has also done a really tremendous job of implementing ERPOs, and they have some really devastating stories of, for example, an individual who, when that person was younger, had made threats within a school system, had actually broke into a school, and they were able to use an ERPO to take that person's weapons away. We see that most recently with the Smith Rock situation. And importantly, we also see it in suicides that I think we need to think of these things differently when it's someone who's in a moment of individual crisis or dealing with a really hard, tough time as an individual.
This study that came out, and I've got to hear this from Johns Hopkins for a reference on this, said that the Oregon Secretary of State found in an audit that it is underutilized and likely underperforming in preventing gun homicides and suicides. That's kind of a paraphrase from that. So looking at that, why do you think it is being underutilized? And I guess how is it being underutilized?
Ashley, do you want to start and then I can add on?
You go ahead.
Okay. The number one thing from that report shows there's just a lack of education and information. So as Ashley noted, it can be law enforcement or family members here in Oregon. So I think one of the most important things, and it's also important to note that most people agree and support once they know about extreme risk protection laws. It's somewhere to 70 to 80% of citizens believe in and support these laws. So they're pretty commonly accepted if people know about them. So I think something that's really exciting and hopeful is that the state of Oregon actually received federal funding that will be allocated to increase education and training around ERPOs. There's a few other things that could go a long way as well. There's some language barriers. The ERPO does have to be filed in English. So in terms of accessibility, there's barriers to understanding the court and administrative process. And longer term, there's probably some things we could do to actually make those laws even more effective that would require legislative changes. But the biggest thing is just helping people know about them, helping people understand that it's civil and temporary, and making sure that law enforcement knows, again, that shout out to Deschutes where they've done that and they've seen such important results.
It does seem like education being something that really, I'm glad that there's going to be some funding for that, but actually understanding how it works, what it does. As you mentioned, it's a temporary thing. There's all kinds of narratives that people can have, especially on social media, but this is something that can directly save someone's personal life if they're suicidal or someone else's life if they're potentially, threatening violence against others. So to that extent, on the education side, if, say, there's someone out there who has maybe it's a family member and they notice some upsetting behavior, they have a weapon, what do they do to actually go about and actually potentially have this enforced or applied?
Yeah, I can take that. So they can either apply on their own as individuals. The forms are readily available through the court's website. So they can even do some research from home. They don't even have to leave. Or they can contact law enforcement. And it's really about what makes that individual feel the most comfortable. Some family members don't want to make the choice. And, and in that instance, I would highly encourage them to reach out to law enforcement, share your concerns as to why you feel your loved one is a threat to themselves or others. If it is law enforcement, they are readily available and have access to those forms and can apply on the family member's behalf.
That's great. So it is possible. I think it's, again, the education side of it. So just for people to know that those are the steps, the things that they can do, and how they can help prevent this. I guess the one final question here is, are there typical warning signs that someone could see that maybe if they hadn't been thinking about this before, but maybe it's something that they should be thinking about now? Warning signs that say someone should see that may be an indication that somebody should file this.
I mean, I'm happy to chime in, and then Jessica, please add. I think a change in behavior, and your family members, your loved ones are going to know you best. So that change in behavior, maybe purchasing additional guns if they already were a gun owner, going to the shooting range more, kind of obsessing on that, or just seemingly expressing a loss of hope, or any sort of person or target of interest.
And in particular, when we think about suicide prevention, we know that once suicidal ideation passes, most people go on to live a fulfilling life. And there's a lot of misconceptions around suicide, but if we can remove some of the stigma and understand that the world can be hard sometimes, and so showing up and recognizing those warning signs for our loved ones, and more of the research shows even directly asking if we're worried, in terms of mass shootings and school shootings, in 70 to 80%, there had been some kind of warning sign. The example in Maine is that type of warning where someone has started to threaten violence or pictures, drawings, etc. So I think recognizing those things does go a long way, and taking them seriously, and knowing that these kind of gun violence prevention policies work, that they are highly effective, they're making a big difference, and there's things that bring us together to build and make our community safer rather than having to be divisive.
Well, I want to thank both of you, Jess and Ashley, for joining us, here today to talk about this. It's a really serious issue, but it's important, going back to this, to educate, to understand, to hear, how it actually works, to hear how it's been applied and probably saved lives. This is important stuff to understand, and so I'm glad that there is going to be some more educational programs coming out for that. I thank you both very much for joining me here today. To talk about this and share your expertise and experiences, and look forward to maybe having a conversation down the road here as well if some more things come out when some of the other funding comes in for these educational programs. I would love to talk to you again.
Thank you, Greg, for having us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jess and Ashley, and thank you to everybody too who's tuning in here to Fox 12 Now. Again, we are live streaming here every weekday, and starting at 1 p.m. And we have a broad range of conversations that we have on here. This one's, obviously something very serious, and I think it's important for all of us to understand how ERPO works a little more, and looking at those warning signs to help maybe prevent something happening down the road. So really appreciate that conversation. You can share this video as well. It's going to be on our social media channels. So it'll be on Facebook, on YouTube, on our website. It'll be on our apps. You can just click on the Fox 12 Now button. So lots of places that you can do that. We're going to switch gears here right now. So if you're watching on YouTube and Facebook, you will see this video end. We will start another one here just momentarily. We're going to be changing it up. We're going to be actually talking to the new announcers and broadcasters for the Rip City Remix. Rip City Remix is the Portland Trailblazers G League team, and they are having their Fan Fest later today. And the announcers were just announced yesterday, and we've got both of them that are joining us here imminently. So again, if you're watching on social media, you'll see the video end. We'll come right back in just a couple of minutes. If you're watching on the website of the apps, stick around. We'll be back with them in just a bit. I'm Greg Nibbler. This is Fox 12 Now.